Dinging's going to be happening, I think. Hi, Mom. I have our book. Yeah. So I wanted to remind you that they're thinking they should go to San Francisco. And so then, after he said we should all go, David says, There, y'all, see? He agrees with me, Moshe, and he doesn't even like me. David glared at Michael and then climbed into the little plane without ceremony. Are you coming or not? He asked Moshe, who stood wondering how to respond to David's comment. The truth was that he really didn't like David much, but that was simply because of his involvement with Ellie. More than likely, anyway. This zany American was not such a bad fellow. Moshe swallowed his uneasiness and he climbed into the cramped passenger seat in the cockpit next to his rival. As the propeller started to spin, Moshe gripped his briefcase with white-knuckled intensity. Sorry you don't have a seatbelt, pal. Eesh, no seatbelt, Mom, David said with a wry smile. You better hang on. This little sardine can gets a little bumpy. Moshe placed the case under his feet and clutched the edge of his seat with both hands. Beads of sweat formed on his brow as he noticed how close the runway was to a row of apartment buildings. You fly much? David probed as the Piper began to taxi. Moshe nodded. He had only flown once before, and he did not like the sensation. Well, you know how to use a parachute? David asked as he kicked the engine to a roar. No, Moshe hoped that his terror did not show on his face. That's okay. The little plane rattled over the field. These buckets only carry one parachute anyway, and that's mine. David smiled brightly as the plane lifted off with its wheels barely clearing the tops of the apartment buildings. He took a peculiar delight in watching Moshe close his eyes and mutter a prayer of deliverance. Moshe opened his eyes and looked down as the plane began a steady southward climb, and below him he could make out the stone buildings of the monastery of St. Simeon. It bordered along a wealthy suburb. Until now, a pleasant mix of middle-class Arabs and Jews had lived there in harmony. Soon, Moshe knew, Kadamon would become a battleground between the Mutif's hired bullies and the Hagannah as each struggled for one more foothold in Jerusalem. David began to make a slow turn to the east, and to his left, Moshe could just make out tiny forms of British soldiers in Allenby barracks. Just beyond, a silver road climbed the hill of Evil Counsel, where Judas had received payment for his betrayal of Christ. How ironic, thought Moshe. Some misinformed Englishman with a desire for a good view chose the building to build the office of the High British Command on top of that very hill where Judas was paid off. Those Britishers, David, in spite of his good intentions with the Britishers, who had governed Palestine since the collapse of the Turk-Ottoman Empire in 1910, there had been very little besides an evil counsel from the hilltop fortress. Moshe felt little pity for the man who now held the office of High Commissioner. Sir Alan Cunningham was personally sympathetic toward the cause of the Jewish homeland, but his policies were set by a foreign secretary, Bevan, a man known for his antagonism to the Jews and the desire to see the partition plan fall apart before it was even started. Nothing would assure that failure quicker than the continued armed uprising by the Arabs. Bevan hoped that Britain then would be asked to step back in, playing a role more to his liking. What words of evil counsel, Moshe wondered, are being passed on from London to Sir Alan today? He would know soon enough, as would the old man and the Jewish agency. Many Jewish sympathizers within the British mandatory government were willing to pass along those top secret dispatches for no more than a handshake And a thank you. Hi, honey. The tiny Piper cub sputtered and put to a slow turn back over the Mount of Olives. Like ants on an ant hill, the black-clad caravan slowly wound up the mound towards the Jewish cemetery. Yet another scene in the drama being acted out on the streets below. Only 6 more among the 6 million who had died in death camps. Only 6 from among the 100,000s who lived in the city of Jerusalem. And yet Moshe knew that grief was born up that hillside. He remembered the face of his brother Eli and looked away from the funeral procession as it walked toward the rugged walls of the old city and the golden dome of the rock. Such a tiny remnant of Jews lived in the shadow of the Mosque of Omar, and yet they were a thorn in the flesh of the Muslims who surrounded them. The Mutif's holy strugglers, the jihad, had marked the synagogues, and yeshiva students were the yeshiva schools were marked for destruction. Somehow they must hold on to those ancient stones. It will be easier, he thought, to hold the modern facilities of the Hebrew University, the Hassad Hospital, to the north of the city. Although pine-covered Mount Scopus, the hill on which they were built, was deep behind Arab lines and surrounded by Muslim neighborhoods, the structures had the advantage of height, and it would be difficult for even an army of irregulars to capture as long as the hospital was properly supplied. That would be the Hagannah's main problem. Moshe gazed down at the road that led through the Arab-held Sheikh to this university and the hospital. At the base of the long incline was a curve in the road, a perfect place for an ambush. He made a mental note of it as they passed over the heart of the Jewish section in the new city, then completed their turn northwest towards Tel Aviv. Below them laid an artery that would carry the lifeblood of Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. This slender ribbon of highway was Jewish Jerusalem's one link with the sea and the supplies it needed to survive. Moshe knew how easily that timeline could be cut. Below them, the road descended for 20 miles through a narrow gorge called, in Arabic, Bab el-Wad, the gate of the valley. Soaring pines and rocks covered the hillside on either side of the gorge. It was an ideal place, perfect to attack any convoys headed for Jerusalem, and no doubt the soldiers of Hagannah knew every outcropping and hiding place where a man could do the work of 100. Finally, David spoke as if reading Moshe's mind. Down there is where you fellas are going to have your problem. There's not much going to come up that gorge without a fight. I've been looking at it over this week as I've flown this run. Here, let me show you. And he pushed the stick forward and the plane dropped steeply toward the tops of the trees on either side of the road. Moshe gulped and held tightly to his seat as he stared straight ahead. Well, stick your head out the window, pal. You can't see anything that way. He's so mean to him. Okay, obediently, Moshe shoved the window open and stuck his head out into the wind where just below him were treetops. Without much effort, he thought, I could gather eggs from birds' nests. Watch this, David yelled as they came to a small clearing where there was abandoned rocks and a small group of Arab peasants, rifles and bandoliers full of bullets slung over their shoulders. Their faces were so distinct that Moshe could make out missing teeth and the gaping mouth of one of them. As David buzzed their little squad, they whipped out their rifles into action and began shooting with a menacing pop at Moshe's head. He jerked it back inside just as a bullet punctured the wing. David swept the plane quickly skyward and out of range. You idiot! Moshe cried angrily. David raised his eyebrows in mock concern. Gee, are you hurt, pal? He grinned. We could have been shot down. Moshe slammed the window shut, noticing a neat round bullet hole right through the glass. Nah, he sniffed. These little cans can take a lot of flak. Practically indestructible, according to my friend Michael. He says we're going to bomb the Arab Legion with them. I could have been killed. That would have been a real shame, David said in amusement. You are a madman. Moshe combed his fingers through his hair and resumed his survey of the road through Bab el Wad. Come on, David said at last. Don't take it so hard. Most of these Arabs are lousy shots. Chances are very slim if they aim at you, they'll hit each other. Counting on that, were you? Moshe glared at David. Just why did you come to Palestine, Mr. Meyer? He asked. Ellie asked me the same thing last night, sitting right where you're sitting, David grinned. And how did you answer her? I'm curious. I said I came for her. And what did she say to that? She asked me if I would have joined the Egyptian Air Force if she'd been in Cairo, and I said, maybe. I fail to see what it is she ever saw in you. Funny thing, that's what she said. David scratched his head. But you know, she doesn't think much of you either. She thinks you've copped out on your own people, you know. David paused long enough for his words to sink in. Of course, the professor is wise to both of us, I think. He's got you figured for a Hagannah man, and I don't know what he thinks of me. No one quite knows what to think of you, Mr. Meyer. I'm driving this plane, aren't I? I've got my reasons for being here, and until I get my reasons safely home, I'm going to do what I can to help with this two-bit operation. That's what counts in my book. We live by different books, apparently, said Moshe. Maybe, maybe not. You're worried about a lot of people. I care about one. Yourself? Okay, make that two. Me and Ellie. Maybe a few more on the fringe like Michael, but that's the lot. Okay, we're going to stop there, Mom. They're still flying in the plane over the valley of the dead. No, I'm just kidding. You know, over that valley where there's just a small little road and anyone can get in and capture people or kill people.